Hi, I'm Anna, and welcome to this Sompo Deep Cut. Portugal is one of those chapters that looks small until you open it. Then suddenly you're in a country that behaves much bigger than its map, a long, thin strip pressed against the Atlantic, folding into mountains, plateaus, river valleys, and sunburnt plains. For diploma students, Portugal is never just port plus a few dry wines. It's a country where native grapes, old wines, and sharply divided climates create more stylistic range than you expect, and where exam questions can zoom from a single region to a whole country strategy in one line. I like to begin in the far north, where the country is at its greenest. Vino Verde doesn't just mean green wine. It's a cool, rainy maritime region where vineyards climb trellises to escape humidity and disease pressure. Granitic soils, high rainfall, and Atlantic winds all conspire to give naturally high acid, low alcohol wines. Historically, there was a little spritz in bottle. Today, that little prickle is often added conscientiously to emphasize freshness. Within Vino Verde, sub-regions have their own voices. Monsau e Melgaco, warmer and more sheltered, gives Albarino more weight and ripeness. Lima leans into Loriro's floral lift. Inland zones suit grapes like Aveso and Arinto that need slightly more warmth. The region teaches you about disease management, canopy work, and the way spritz, acidity, and low alcohol can become a deliberate style choice rather than a flaw. Trace the Douro inland, and the country hardens. The river carves steep terraced valleys out of schist and everything tightens. Slopes, river bends, temperature range, and the margin for error. This is port country, of course, but in D3, the Douro is also a serious dry wine region. Baijo Corgo in the west is cooler and wetter. Sima Corgo is the heartland, more balanced in heat and rainfall. Douro Superior is further inland, hotter, drier, more extreme. Old mixed plantings dominate on the steepest slopes. Field blends of Touriga National, Touriga Franca, Tinta Rores, Tinta Barroca, and more, all co fermented in lagares or tanks. On gentler sites, modern single varietal blocks appear, often trellised and mechanized. The red wines can move from midweight and fragrant to dense and structured depending on altitude and exposure. Dry Douro is a masterclass in how schist, slope, and field blends create power while still holding on to acidity. Move south and slightly inland, and the landscape softens into the pine forests and granite of Dow. If the Douro is power, Dow is finesse. Vineyards sit at altitude on a sheltered plateau ringed by mountains that protect them from the worst Atlantic influence. Granite dominates the soils, draining freely and forcing roots deep. Summers are warm, but nights cool down, helping grapes retain freshness. Touriga National is the star here, often blended with Mencia, Alfroquero, and others to produce reds that are aromatic, finely structured, and more medium bodied than their Douro cousins. And Cruzado leads the whites, a grape capable of elegance and real longevity when handled with care, often seeing a mix of stainless steel and oak with lees aging to build texture. Dow is where you see how altitude and granite conspire to carve edges into otherwise generous fruit. Shift back towards the coast, and the air thickens again. Bairrada sits under direct Atlantic influence. Wet winters, cool summers, plenty of rot pressure, and the combination of limestone and clay gives the region its name Baro for clay. This is Baga country, a late ripening, thick skinned red grape that can produce wines of searing tannin and acidity if mishandled, or hauntingly complex, age worthy wines when yields are controlled and picking is timed carefully. In cooler, wetter years, getting Baga ripe is a race against the rain. In warmer vintages, it becomes one of Portugal's great grapes. Modern producers are taming Baga with gentle extraction, careful oak, and sometimes blending, but its core character, firm, structured, slightly austere in youth, remains. Bairrada is a perfect diploma region because it forces you to talk about climate risk, disease pressure, soil, and winemaking adaptation all at once. Slide down the coast, and the country opens into Lisboa, a long coastal band of hills and plains running north to south just inland from the Atlantic. The climate here remains maritime and relatively cool, making it one of Portugal's most productive regions for good value whites and reds. Historically, cooperatives dominated, pumping out bulk wine for domestic consumption and export. Today, more quality focused producers are carving out identities for individual DOCs within Lisboa. But in diploma terms, Lisboa often appears as a value for money counterpoint to more famous inland regions. Further inland, Tejo sits astride the Tagus River, with fertile alluvial soils on the plains and more interesting sites on the surrounding hills. Tejo is more about scale and mechanization. Flatter land, machine harvested vineyards, international varieties alongside local ones, but quality driven producers are pushing for better known subregions and improved branding. Both Lisboa and Tejo are important not because they dominate prestige discussions, but because they feed Portugal's image as a source of reliably priced, well made wines. Cross the estuary and you reach the Peninsula de Setúbal, where two stories run in parallel. One is Moscatel de Setúbal, fortified sweet wines from Muscat of Alexandria and increasingly Muscat à Petit Grain, with orange peel, rose, and dried fruit character often deepened by oxidative aging. The other is volume still wine, red and white blends made from both local and international varieties, often at accessible price points. Setúbal shows up in the syllabus as both a style anchor for Moscatel and as part of Portugal's broader business picture, a region that can do high character niche wines and high volume everyday bottles at once. Then the land opens wide. Alentejo is one of Portugal's largest regions, and when you see it, you understand why mechanization took hold here so fast. Rolling plains, wider spacing, and lower slopes make it easier to machine harvest and manage large vineyards. The climate is hot, dry, and decidedly continental away from the Atlantic edges. Drought and heat stress are headline concerns, so varieties like Aragonese, Tempranillo, Trincadeira, Alicante Boucher, and Antauvas are favored for their ability to cope. The reds tend to be ripe, generously planted, often plush with soft tannins. The whites can have more weight and lower acidity than their northern peers, though altitude in subregions like Porto Alegre pulls styles tighter and fresher. Alentejo is also where tradition has resurfaced in a very modern way. Vino de Taja, amphora fermented and aged wines in large clay vessels, has an officially recognized DOC category, preserving and elevating a historical method that had nearly disappeared. The region is a clear example of how a hot area can build a quality reputation through both modern infrastructure and revived tradition. Threaded through all of this is Portugal's business story. For a long time, cooperatives were the gravitational center of the industry, especially in regions like Bairrada, Lisboa, and parts of the interior. Many small growers depended on them. Quality could be uneven, but survival was possible. EU accession and investment changed the landscape. More private quintas emerged, more growers bottled under their own labels, and the focus began to tilt towards regional identity and native grapes as points of difference. Large companies, So Grape most notably, built strong international brands and helped put Portuguese stable wines on shelves far from home. Native varieties turned from a liability into a unique selling point. Turiga National, Encruzado, Baga, Alvarinha, Antauvas, Arinto, once nearly invisible in export markets, are now printed proudly on labels, even if they remain challenging to pronounce. Portugal's export map leads heavily on a handful of countries. The UK, US, Brazil, Canada, and Northern Europe are key markets for both still and fortified wines. Many producers use broader vino regional categories rather than tight DOCs to allow flexibility in blending and labeling, especially when they want to spotlight a grape name rather than a small, unfamiliar appellation. At the same time, DOCs like Duro, Dao, Bairrada, Vino Verde, and Alentejo anchor the country's reputation for quality. When the diploma asks about Portugal, it rarely wants you to recite a list. It wants you to see a pattern. Cool, wet Atlantic regions where disease pressure is high and acidity is preserved in grapes like Alvarinho, Loureiro, Arinto, and Baga. Hot, dry interior and southern regions where drought is the enemy and producers rely on heat tolerant red and white varieties, older bush wines, and sometimes irrigation. Schist in the Douro, forcing wines to dig deep and giving power and structure. Granite in Dao and Vino Verde, keeping wines bright and lifted. Limestone and clay in Bairrada, supporting high tannin, high acid baga with real depth. Clay and sand in Alentejo, lending softer structure to ripe, generous wines. Portugal is a country that lives at the intersection of tradition and adaptation. Lagares and Tajas sit alongside stainless steel and temperature controlled presses. Field blends share space with focused plantings of single varieties. Cooperatives and multinational producers coexist with tiny family quintas. And through all of it runs one constant, an insistence on doing things in a distinctly Portuguese way. That's the lens I'm holding as I study not just where each region is, but why growers planted what they did there, how they're dealing with climate and market shifts, and how all of that shows up in the glass. You'll find the full written companion article linked to this podcast. I do hope you enjoyed listening, and I'll see you in the next deep cut.